Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to a special episode announcing Interpreting Wine as the new podcast media partner of Academie Du Vin Library. This is a partnership that sits uniquely at the intersection of great writing, great audio, storytelling, and wine. To stay up to date on all our exciting future plans, please head to academieduvinlibrary.com and register for their newsletter. And if you discovered Interpreting Wine from Academie Du Vin Library, then welcome, and please do subscribe on your favorite podcast channel. This episode features Academie Du Vin Library Managing Director Hermione Ireland, and we first hear her publishing origin story. Before discussing the founding of Academie Du Vin Library, Hermione gives us a team overview and looks at the modern business. We discuss storytelling in wine. She takes us into their upcoming travel guide book series. We talk audiobooks and business opportunities, the practicalities of getting published, and personal brand building. And if you are yourself an aspiring wine writer, those last two sections are full of some really great practical advice from Hermione. Enjoy.
Hi, Lawrence. I'm Hermione Ireland. I run the Academie Du Vin Library. I'm the managing director and publisher, which I love that part of my title. So I've been a book publisher, or I've been in book publishing pretty much my whole career. I joined the Academie Du Vin Library in the summer of 2020, which was obviously during lockdown, so that was an interesting time to join a business. We were remote anyway, so there was an element of it not being as weird as it might have been. I've always worked for big publishing companies before now, so when the opportunity came up to run a small, very niche, focused, targeted publishing company, I was really interested. You know, I'd always had a senior job in the big publishing companies, semi-senior, but being able to actually sort of look after a business completely was just a dream come true. And I'd published wine books before, but to be honest, June 2020 was really my kind of rebirth in the wine industry, which is very much what it feels like to me. So now I feel like I'm more than 50% in the wine industry and slightly less than 50% in the book industry.
I think that's great. I mean, and it's something that I will ask you about as well. You know, that experience with publishing and how that then integrates with wine, because I think you have a fresh perspective that I think will be interesting to the listener and be interesting to myself. I wonder, just before we go, I guess down the wine side of things, I wonder if you mind just fleshing out a little bit more on the publishing side, just in terms of maybe what kinds of books and maybe even I'm not an expert on publishing, so maybe giving us a sort of intro into that world.
Course. So I always wanted to work in publishing after I'd ruled out journalism, just because I think books are such a fabulous. They're more than products. They're a they're a gateway to all sorts of things, whether it's the fantasy world of fiction or just knowledge. So I spent most of my career at Dorling Kindersley, where I was the group marketing director, marketing and PR. And you probably know the DK list. It's adults and children's reference. So a lot of knowledge and a lot of practical. So parenting, gardening, lots of fantastic kids books. So the thing about working at DK was that it was a very strong brand. So as from my marketing perspective, communicating the brand values and reaching consumers who would like the brand across lots of different types of books was really a big part of what I did. I've always worked for really good companies. I spent a bit of time at Phaidon in the pre-cookery days when they were, sort of one of the two best art book publishers in the market. And then I did a bit of time at Hachette and at HarperCollins. So I've worked for all the big publishers. So I've worked on some big fiction books. I've worked on some books by J.K. Rowling, for instance, and all genres of fiction, and then some big non-fiction books as well. As I said, including some wine books. So DK published they were the UK distributor for Robert Parker's big books, and I worked with Tom Stevenson and Robert Joseph and some wonderful writers like that. But it was you're multitasking a lot when you have a list like DK's, and you're looking at lots of different audiences, and to be honest, I had a large team of people who did most of the work, and I just sat at the top and directed people. So,
okay, but always on the marketing side, yeah.
Yes, I've done some sales as well. I've done foreign rights, which is really fun because you get to travel all over the world and stay in really nice hotels. I went into publishing because I knew they had really good lunches. You hang out with authors who are really nice and interesting, and I didn't have the patience for editorial. I have a rather butterfly mind, so I like to do lots of different things, and marketing suits me very well. And I have done some sales and some PR, but I think if you cut me through the middle, the rock says marketing, basically.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, that's super helpful because, again, I'm always struck by, people like myself, getting drawn into wine, and I think it's so important to recognize all of those skills and all those experiences that people have beforehand, and I absolutely think it makes wine stronger when you have people from diverse backgrounds coming into the mix, coming into the party. So I think again, it's probably something that you're asked about a lot, but I think it would be great to, again, for for those that don't know, giving them a sense of the founding and the foundations really of Academie Du Vin Library.
Of course, yes, and it's probably the story I tell the most often. But I think it's an important one. And we're blessed. Our godfathers were Stephen Spurrier and Hugh Johnson, and they were having lunch with Ben Howkins, who's another who had gone to school with them and also has written a couple of books for us. And they were talking about all these wonderful old wine books of the past, André Simon, Maurice Healy, people like that, and how it was such a shame that those books weren't in print anymore. So it was a pet project. I mean, Stephen was a creative guy. He was a bit of a visionary. He was wonderful. And he wasn't expecting us necessarily to include his book, Story of Wine, but that was out of print at the time. And it's a really important book. So they had a conversation about it, and they talked to Simon McMurtry, who is a wonderful guy. He was our founder and our chairman for the first 3 years, and he's also the chair of the trustees of WSET. He ran Laithwaites for quite a long time. He also, when he was 24, ran Mitchell Beazley, which was the illustrated book publisher of the day. So they said to Simon, we think we should set up a publishing company. And this was in late 2018, and they decided that the first book they would publish was Michael Broadbent's Wine Tasting, which was again a seminal title. Michael was the person who first formalised wine tasting as a discipline and said, look, this is how you do it. He wrote it down, and so that you could then learn if you wanted to come into it, and you hadn't grown up like Michael, working in wine merchants and then at Christie's, you could work out how to do it. And so they did a commemorative edition, and it was published in April 19, and it was, I think, around the time of his 90-something birthday, and he just got married again, and he died later that year. So they were very pleased and proud that they'd published it before he had died. And that really set, that was the beginning. But I would say that the business has changed quite a bit since that, the origins of it. And mostly Susan Keevill's our editorial director, and she and I, when we're deciding what books to commission, we primarily want to publish new books these days. So we do sometimes still republish either old classics or books that had not quite, come to fruition very recently, but we're mostly interested in commissioning new books these days. And
I think it's absolutely, fascinating, of course, to hear the roots of the company and where it came from. But I think also, as you've just kind of intimated there, I think it's also super important to understand your kind of vision and where you see the company going. And I think we'll certainly as we move through, I think we'll certainly get into a sort of looking off into the future and talking about and being maybe slightly more kind of creative and innovative, thinking about where the puck might be going in the future. But I think it would be great really for you to kind of introduce us to the modern day Academie Du Vin Library, potentially through the people. I think that's really the window which I invite you to start to explore.
I mean, I'm very blessed. The people in the book industry are fabulous people. I was not surprised, but when I joined the Academie Du Vin Library and met the people in the wine industry, it turns out they were even nicer than the people in the publishing industry. And my team is wonderful. We're a small team, but we're not tiny. We've talked before, we just acquired Classic Wine Library recently, which is a brilliant list of, top tier reference books to most of the top wine regions. We're publishing to a lot more of the regions. And Rebecca Clare, who has come into the Academy as the editorial director for Classic Wine Library, and she was running that business for the last year or so single-handedly. Whereas on the Academy side, we have Susan Keevill, who edited Decanter a few years ago. She's our editorial director. She's the vision really behind the books. Tim Foster, who's our art director, he's at this point our consultant art director because he's trying to retire and I don't ever quite let him. He worked for Mitchell Beazley for many years. He's a very experienced illustrated book designer, and our books are not as illustrated as, say, DK's books, but they do have an illustrated quality to them, and designing those books is very, very different from designing mono textbooks. And then my colleague John Guy Somlai, who both she and Susan actually have WSET diplomas. She was at Liberty, and she runs all of our marketing. She runs our website, our social media. We have a blog, an online magazine called Vinosity, which is really important to us because it allows us to publish much more topical pieces, articles about regions that it may take us quite a long time to get around to doing a book about, and particularly it allows us to work with a lot of younger and less experienced writers. Deciding to publish a book with one particular writer is obviously well, any book is a risk, and you are likely to publish with people who've got some track record. But we can work with younger people, and we publish a lot of people we met through Queen and Wong's network last year, which was lovely. And then my ops manager is Magda, and she's actually based in Poland, and she makes sure the wheels don't come off. She's an absolutely critical part. Adam Lechmere has joined us quite recently, and he's a very, very seasoned journalist. He founded Clubonologique magazine. He knows everybody, and he's joined us as publishing director. So he works with me on lots of special projects, and he is looking after a new series that we're launching this autumn, a small format travel wine series, which was his idea, which I'm very excited about. And then I have two wonderful people in finance who come as a team, Julian and Jess, and they're sort of an out of house, but they feel very much like they're part of the business. So yes, there are a number of us. We try and meet in person at least every 2 or 3 months. We meet on Zoom for a team meeting every month. Yeah. I mean, it's a small business. You definitely miss something not being in the same physical space, but everybody lives in different places, including Magda in Poland, but not just her. So I think there's quite a good. Rebecca, I think, has really enjoyed has been joining and being part of a team, which she didn't really have before. It was just her and Richard Burton, who was the owner of Classic Wine Library. So I love the energy of the team. It's great.
Yeah, and I love this because I'm getting to imagine all the different connections that you've kind of got going on there, and I've been and am interested in entrepreneurship and the kind of the modern business setup, and I think things have certainly changed, and I think changes have been accelerated over the last 4 years or so, and that is to me, that is a thoroughly modern setup, where you do have those different locations, and you have those different functions and different countries in Magda's case, but it works. You obviously everything is running as it should be, and I think it's really what you brought up there, and I'm curious how. Be that kind of actually by design or just by adaptation. What do you think about when I can put that question really around maintaining a culture, and I guess maintaining a closeness really, and a sort of synergy really between all of you.
I think that's a very interesting question from a business perspective. I did a mini MBA at Stanford Business School in summer 2013, and there were two strands to the course, and it was culture and it was strategy. And I'm naturally much more of a culture person, and there's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm very much a people person. I think one of my probably one of my best talents, frankly, as a member of a team is my team building, is my management of people. I'm not good at lots and lots of things, but I am good at that, and it's really important to me. And so, the team before I came in as the managing director, there hadn't been somebody. Paul Simon had to step in and run the company for a bit, which is not what he'd intended. So, it didn't have such a cohesive centre as I'd like to think that I have created since June 2020. So it's like 3.5 years, isn't it? It's about regularly talking. I think everybody feels... So with the team meeting once a month, everybody just tells everybody what they're doing so that everybody can feel... And some of them have more bandwidth to be interested in the whole than others. Some of them have to be more focused on their particular track that they're on. But that's very much about how individual people, deal with what they're doing. But we quite often, those of us who are in or near London will come up to wine tastings. I think we were all together at the Australia tasting, actually, several of us. Okay. So, the more times that some of us can get together in person, I think the better. But I think it's important that everybody has a shared sense of the vision of the company. There are 4 of us on the publishing team, which Adam, Susan, Tim and I, and Rebecca, there are 5 of us. I knew it was more than half of the company basically is in the publishing team. So we get together on a monthly basis to talk about new book ideas. At the end of the day, somebody somebody has to make a decision, and that, at the end, the buck stops with me. But I've always believed, publishing is a collaborative industry. I think, of course, wine is, you make wine with lots of different people, mostly. Good books are put together with a number of people, and then they're sold and marketed, obviously, with a number of people. So I think having everybody lean in and know that their opinions are important, I think that's really key to me. So that's the kind of culture I try and foster.
I think that's so interesting because that, again, for me, what I'm picking up is that that's a thoroughly modern structure, a thoroughly modern setup. But I think what's also interesting for me is to contrast that with, I guess, some of these more, eternal truths and these things that have generally been found to be consistent over time, which for me is really around storytelling. And I think that, so much of business really and so much of product and getting people engaged in just about anything at all, it comes back to storytelling, and certainly that's something that I've put forward on the podcast. In terms of the structure is invariably, if I sit down with a producer, I'm trying to get the story out from them. I'm not going straight into the glass. I'm not talking about a product that the listener can't hear. Wine is not a spectator sport, so let's connect on the stories, and then I think that opens the door in people's mind to then seek out the wine and to enjoy the wine in a very different way. And just sharing that to really kind of draw out your own thoughts around, I guess, the more broadly that piece around storytelling. But then where do you fit in with that? Be that through Academie Du Vin Library or even in the format of books, and writing as opposed to podcasts or digital media.
Yeah, well, you and I have talked about different media in the past, and I think they're all as valid for storytelling modes as each other. I mean, I love listening to your podcast. I love listening to other people's podcasts. Hearing people's actual voices is wonderful. I just think there are, different media suit different times or potentially different messages. I'm a bookworm, so for me, I love nothing. I mean, I love watching TV. I love watching films. I love stories like that way. But curling up with a book, it's that thing of when I'm reading a really good book and I go to bed with it and I stay up until 2 because I keep thinking just one more chapter. You just get sucked in, and I think stories make the world go round. I mean, obviously, as a marketing person, I would say that to a certain extent because a lot about marketing is storytelling. I think the wine industry has a lot of fascinating stories. I mean, on the one hand, it's growing some grapes, it's squishing them a bit, it's turning it into a drink and putting it in a bottle. But it's just, we all know it's so much more than that. Certainly, those of us who are in it, that's why we're here. We're obsessed. I mean, some people might get slightly obsessed about cheese. You might get, some people are a bit obsessed about bread, but far more of us are obsessed about wine. And we all know it's not just because of its intoxicating quality, right? There's something about it. So you get these amazing people, and so many of them are amazing people. And they're growing things, growing these grapes, often in fringe areas, and they've got lots of challenges, and they are entrepreneurs, and they're innovators, and they're doing all sorts of things, and they're all trying to make their own product a bit different. So they've got a story in their heads. And I think a lot of wine drinkers, wine lovers want to know those stories. So books and podcasts and magazines are always that we can help get those stories from the producers to the end users, the customers, the lovers, the wine lovers. I mean, books do not suit everybody. Not everybody wants long form. But for the people who do, you can do so much with a book. You can have reference, you can have information, and yes, it's online, but I still trust the words of an expert, and most experts are more minded to put that information in between the covers of a book rather than online. It's easier to monetize. It's easier to show people. It has more kudos, I would argue. And then there's just wonderful stories, and the people who want to put their stories down, the winemakers who want to tell their stories, or if somebody who loves a particular region and they want to explore it. I think the space that a book gives them to explore, an idea over a long period of time, I think is just a wonderful freedom, a wonderful opportunity. So I think for us as publishers, for me as a publisher, you feel a little bit like a midwife, I guess. The work at the end of the day is the writers, but you can help them shape it, make sure it's perfect, and then once they've created it with your help, you then are responsible for making sure it gets out into the world and gets to as many people as possible. And that's the whole sales and marketing challenge, which is really difficult and therefore quite fun and interesting, apart from the days when it's not. But generally, it's a puzzle. It's like, I've got very limited resources, and that's the time as well as money. And so now I've got the book, what do I do with it? that's what I think basically Academie Du Vin and me as a wine book publisher is doing. We're here to tell stories. There are some fantastic reference books in the world, particularly Hugh and Jancis's, the World Atlas and Jancis's Oxford Companion. Really, really important information. And again, I would still rather see that in a book format than online. All of that scholarship put together in one place. I mean, they update them every 5 or 6 years. It may not be the most up to date the second you're looking at it. You may find something online, but online is the web is a quagmire of, you've got some nice high peaks of good solid information that maybe somebody's keeping up to date and that you can trust the source, but you've got more swampland on the web than you have high peaks. Whereas if people have spent money and effort putting books together, you can be sure you can trust what's in there. But yeah, it's not our bailiwick. We're storytellers more than reference guys. It's quite hard work and it's quite expensive, and I don't want to do that. So.
Yeah. No, I love it, and I was just as you were talking there, Hermione, I was just noting down a couple of movie and a series that I watched recently. One was Air, which is the story of Nike and their early days and how they ended up signing Michael Jordan and doing this revolutionary shoe deal with him, and then one of my kind of favourite series of all time, the Queen's Gambit, which I think is just absolutely brilliant, and it always. I think it always comes across most visually there. When you look at like the poster for things like that, they have to say, okay, they probably have some basketball or some Nike reference on the poster for Air. They have I believe she sat at a chessboard for Queen's Gambit. But again, it's that whole thing. It's not a movie about basketball. It's not a movie about chess. It's it's genuinely about kind of so much more than that. And just to say as well, I think I will ask you the impossible question, essentially, which is to really look at all of what we've spoken about so far, and I guess maybe in terms of things that have come out on your watch, basically, and maybe give us a sort of a deep dive, a mini case study into one of those stories that you're either is particularly front of mind or that you think will translate particularly well into this format, and again, we appreciate you can't cover everybody, and that there will be people who are left out. But I think some specifics around what were the stories that came out that weren't just about wine and did have this sort of, I guess, bigger reach and were more magnetic. I think that would be a great example to sort of dig into a bit more.
That was making me rifle through my Rolodex of our titles, and obviously you're not allowed favourite children, but it's bad form. But Andrew Jefford's Drinking with the Valkyries has to be the best, I think, case study. And interestingly, because it's a collection of his writings, it's not one single story, but it's a collection of his articles from Decanter in the magazine, Decanter online, World of Fine Wine primarily. But each one is a mini story. And Andrew, he's the most beautiful, thoughtful writer. I mean, everybody always says it because it's true. He's just the finest mind. And he happens to be writing about wine. He's deeply philosophical, so a lot of the stories in it... I've read it several times. I don't read books more than once, generally. Some of the writing makes me cry. It's just so poetic. But it's also the universal truths he's looking at. He's looking at what motivates people to carry on working when all the young people have left a region and it's really difficult. He talks about all sorts of things. He's got a fascinating... He opens the book with a look at the archaeology of food and drink and how they can trace where wine and where fermented drinks were first found. And it's quite a long article. It's fantastic. In the middle of the book, I've always been a tea fan, but he's turned me into being an uber tea fan because the middle is a tea. It's called the tea break. I think as a book, it's. Decanter readers particularly are used to Andrew's great mind. If people are lucky enough to go into a talk, he doesn't do these things very often. But it's sort of linear. Our book, because we put it together, you can buy it in shops and you can take it away with you and you can just have a slice of Andrew Jefford wherever you want. And I think that's a great gift to be able to give people. So I think stories, yes, they're almost epigrammatic because the online articles are very short. A lot of them in the book they're a double-page spread, so it means you can read it. You can jump in and out of it. But he gets to the heart of a story so quickly. And I think you take a lot away from that book. I just want to put in a second one, which is our sort of our trademark series. It's called the On series, and it's very much Susan's brainchild baby. We've done 4, she's working on the 5th, and they're all portraits of regions. So we started with Bordeaux, then we jumped to California, then we've just done Burgundy, having done Champagne before that, and now we're doing Tuscany. We're coming to Italy a bit late, really, but it's very hard to ignore the big French regions. And this is Susan's storytelling of particular region through the writings of some of the top wine writers, most of the top wine writers in the world, I would say, certainly English language. So she commissioned some new pieces. About half of each of the book is newly commissioned, and half of it she finds from articles, essays, extracts that have been published before. Some of them are oldish. We've got Visitelli, obviously, in a Champagne book. He was the great 19th century Champagne aficionado. Evelyn Waugh is, I think, probably on Champagne and on Burgundy. She's brilliant at these putting these anthologies together. But then she commissions lots of new people, and she finds also articles that have been written in the last couple of years. But she tells the story of of each region from the past, through key people, through key innovations, to what's happening now. And she will even have people writing about what they think is going to happen in the future. Sure. So they're not reference books like Jane and Jasper's brilliant Inside Bordeaux and Burgundy, but they bring an extra facet, I think, for people who are really interested in a particular region. You'll get a lot out of it. And again, you can dip in and out of them. Most of the articles are about 2,000 words. I'm very proud of them. I think they're a great addition to the canon of wine literature.
I'm really enjoying how you're structuring your answers here, and I've interviewed one or two people, so I think I've got a good track record for that. So I can obviously now start with more complex questions, can't I? I can really kind of open out the discussion, and I think I'll obviously answer this in the way that makes the most sense. But there's sort of a 3-part question that I like to ask, and it's kind of focused really on one of the new styles of books and new publications that you mentioned you have coming out later on in the year, which is this small format travel wine type guide. So I wonder if almost you take us before that, because I think that actually the decision, which is, as you say, rests with you. I think that will give us a really interesting insight into what you see as the opportunities, because obviously that's had to pass through your filter as, this is kind of the way to go. And then also maybe, so again, as well as introducing what the book is and what the series is going to be about, then I think bringing in an element of that kind of where does a book like that sit in a digital landscape, where maybe there's so much choice about blogs and Instagram profiles and hashtags. There are all these different ways to indeed travel companies as well. There are so many channels that we can use, and where might that book and where might that series sit within those choices, I guess, that people have to make before they travel. So
I think, up until, to begin with, our books were very much for, the wine aficionado and the reader. And it has to be, there are plenty of people who like fine wine. In fact, a lot of people who probably buy the most expensive wine are not maybe book readers. So, we're looking at a Venn diagram where we have to find people who like books and who are really passionate about wine, because otherwise you'll buy other books about lots of other subjects. So I don't remember how the idea came up with Adam, but when he suggested it to me, I really liked the idea of having a series of books that were suitable for a much broader audience. And that's because it's not just commercially, obviously that seems like a good idea, but it's about spreading the wine love, frankly. Yeah. So I think we were looking for adjacencies. We're quite interested in doing some other books with wine and food, or wine, food and culture. So there's a number of sort of ideas bubbling around. You have to work out what makes sense commercially and how it fits into the list. What I loved about this idea was that these were, I come from DK, we published the Eyewitness Travel Guides and the Rough Guides Travel Guide, so I know travel really quite well. And both of those brands have a large format book, and they have a pocket guide, a smaller, cheaper one, which, particularly, this all started, oh my God, I must say 20 years ago now, the beginning of the mini breaks, the weekend breaks and the cheap airlines. So as we were, discussing the concept of the series, I suddenly thought, if we get this right and we make it travel enough, it can sit in the travel section of the bookshop. And the travel section of the bookshop has many, many shelves, and many, many people go in there. The wine section of the bookshop has, if you're lucky, one full bookshelf, one 1 meter wide, 6 shelf high, which is just not enough space. So then we got really excited, and we started thinking, okay, so they have to be well known enough, but and places where people might go. So the intention behind the books are that they are aspirational, a bit like the little wallpaper travel guides. They will appeal to people with a keen design aesthetic. Some of the little travel books out there are very, do what they say on the tin, more magazine-y. We wanted these to be lovely. They need to tell you a bit about wine without not dumbing it down too much, but taking you by the hand. A trusted companion guide. That's what it was. And they can't be too expensive to produce. We're going to put them out at £12.99, which is more expensive than some of the other pocket guides. A lot of them are under £10. But frankly, if you're interested in wine, then you will be, I suspect, a bit less price sensitive than other people. And the idea is to publish lots and lots of them. We'll do 2 every 6 months, ideally. Okay. The reality of our business is that we often need some commercial support. So we will be working with either the wine boards and or the tourist boards of a particular region. And obviously that if that helps us cover some of the costs of origination and printing, that's fantastic. But I think there's a lot of space for these books to be sold in the regions, so in the shops, in the tourist centres, and in the wineries themselves. And we know that a lot of the main European wine regions are seriously developing their visitor centres. I mean, even the Brits are. The Californians have been doing it for a long time. So yes, I mean, I'd like to see them being picked up by people who aren't wine people at all, who are just saying, this is a great idea, go on a wine trip and find out about stuff that you don't know about. In terms of your question about different media, so we're doing these books as a partnership with Club Onologique, who we are commercially, we're related to from a business perspective. We have a shared investor. And Club O, they do very well with travel-related content. And they do a Rioja report. I don't know if this is the first year they're doing it. So what's going to happen is that they are producing the listings, the gazetteer section, which is about a third of the book, which is, which are the best bodegas to go to, where are the best tapas restaurants, all of those things you would expect from a good travel book. And they will have, the books will have QR codes which will take you through to their website. So in the book we'll have a selection of the ones that we've editorially curated, but there will be a lot more on Club O's website. So you'll get this symbiosis between digital and the printed book. They in turn will obviously, mention the book on their website, but it means you can go with your trusty smartphone. I mean, the book is going to be a pocket-sized book, so it'll fit in your handbag or your pocket anyway, but you can then get more information on your phone if you want to. And I think that hybrid digital to book it's just a win-win, which I know you love win-wins. I think to your other question about how people consume their content, I would repeat what I've said before. There are people who love books, and those people will self-select to go into Hatchard's or any other bookshop of your choosing, and look around in the travel section at the Spanish area and decide if they want to buy your book. The people who travel book sales, as we all know, have diminished in the last 10 years because so much content is available online. But the bookshop is still full of travel books. So it might have, from its heady peak 15 years ago, it may have settled at a lower level. But lots of us, to our previous conversation, still love books. Often you're somewhere, you don't want to be reliant on your phone. Maybe you've not got new Wi-Fi. I don't know. I'm just going to keep saying it because I publish books. I'm a book lover, but I firmly believe that we talked about doing an app. We will do an ebook. I've done ebooks of some of my books. I'm actually intending on getting the rest of them put into ebook format this year because I think that's important for accessibility for some people. Apps are really expensive to produce. I'm not going to do that. And I don't think podcasts are great for travel. Personally, I think anything where you want recommendations, and you want to be able to refer, I think you need them in your ear is hard. I think you need them in the palm of your hand, whether that's on your phone or in a book. I think that's where you want it. So on the phone, it could be another app, or it could be online. But I think the book has a place.
I totally agree. I think it's even within digital. Again, I think I'm guilty, as I've just shown. I'm just sort of lumping digital together. But it's been shown where I know there's a quite famous author who puts out a lot of free content. But then when he puts out his books, and there's a call to action in the book, he'll put the link in there, and then people who are on the ebooks, they'll click the link, and then he puts the QR code, and then he gives an option of a video course or listening, and it pretty much, rule of thumb and one example, but it pretty much breaks down a third for audio, a third for visual digital, and then a third for video digital. So again, would all of those people have necessarily converted if he hadn't had those other options there? I mean, we'll never know, but I think, I totally agree with you. Having the options out there and having the possibilities there. Also, I do like a challenge. So, I think as you were talking there, of course, Mr. Podcast and Mr. Audio here, I think, potentially one of those things that I've seen tourism, again, outside of wine integrating is actually things like audio tours. So, where you might have a sort of an audio walking tour and again, that's got to be right for the person, and there's a lot to say that actually younger people are maybe slightly more down that route. So if there was the option of a picking on them for no reason at all, but a Rioja kind of walking tour around Aro, which is or around Logroño, it could be okay. You start here, go to that part of the town, and you'll notice this, and again, it's not for everybody. But for those people that want that kind of self-guided, self-directed element, I think there's loads of really exciting ways to integrate all of these things together. It doesn't have to just be a book. It doesn't have to just be a podcast. And indeed, just this thing of audio. Audio is about much more than just podcasts. I mean, I think it comes out in things like audiobooks and all these different channels. And I think there's just going to be more and more kind of cross fertilization between these channels as we go forward.
I think the different formats are really interesting, and I think you're right. They do. The more formats you can work in, the more you're able to reach everybody, because everybody, assuming they want content, obviously, that being the proviso, will have a preferred method of how they consume it. I think audiobooks have had an amazing period over the last few years, and it's showing no signs of stopping. I'm also planning to do more audiobooks this year. I think these books, I still think reference is quite hard, and I would qualify these travel guides as reference. I think for stories, it's for narrative, audio is amazing. The issue I've got at the moment, and I'm thinking quite hard about it, I went to a talk on AI the other day, AI and audio. Is the cost of putting them together in terms, they're much more expensive to put together than an ebook, which is a matter of a couple of £100, if that. So it's always just making a business decision about, will I sell enough of it to justify the investment of several £1,000s, or do I try an AI recording, which I'm thinking of, but then you worry about, particularly because creative, I work in an industry where it's really important for me that creatives are paid for their work. And as soon as you start thinking about using AI narrators, you are undercutting a whole chunk of wonderful creative people who do voice narration. So I think audio, and I think audio walks. I think for these books, I love that idea. People have been playing around with audio for travel, for sort of self-guided walks for 10, 15 years. I would suggest that it's never got above the parapet from a financial perspective. What's the word I'm trying to think of? When you make something pay,
return on investment?
Yes, the return on investment, but the use case for people paying for things. It was the same with apps back in the day. Yeah. We at DK, we were spending sometimes £100,000 on an amazing app on the human body, and we knew there was demand, but people didn't want to pay £10 for it, even though it had all the same content as a book that we either sold for 20 or 30, and I think we had two different human body books at doing slightly different things, but for the regular family, but they did have a crossover for anatomy students, for medical students, and much cheaper than the £100 obviously books, although they probably needed them. I'm sure they needed those too, but the economics didn't work. If you have to put 100,000 into an app, the least you could sell it for was £10. You didn't want to undermine your book content either. And apparently everybody just thought, because stupid rubbish games were 99 pence, that's how much an app should cost. So I think, I've worked in content in the creative industry my entire life, and over the last 20 years there has been a real issue working out how to monetize different formats and making customers appreciate that they have to pay. And there are lots of different models, and I think the issue for me, so if I'm getting back to the travel guides, I'd love the idea of for every book there was 1 to 5 narrated audio tours, but for them to work for the book, I'd want to commission them so that they fit into the book. They couldn't be just somebody else's audio tours, because they wouldn't belong in what for me would be a holistic, curated, quality checked thing. So then there's an extra cost involved. And can I monetize it? Because, again, another thing that's true for books is that there were periods when we used to put on CDs, and CDs don't cost very much to actually print, but you've still had to create the content, and good content costs money, which you should be able to put a profit margin on by definition. And consumers didn't appreciate the extra that they were getting with a CD. They thought it was just a free thing. So I think from a business perspective, you could do all these wonderful things, but will it help you bring in more money or not? And that is, I think, a difficult question to answer. And I would often say no.
I love these types of conversations, and I think it's. I think a lot of it is around the moment in our evolution. You know, it's like if you're too soon to put something out there, then people will absolutely push back. And I think it's I'm thinking as well, just to the size of companies like Spotify and Apple, of course, but then also I think is it Luminosity, I think they're called, where it's actually a paid podcast network. So I think all of these things are I think clues about where people are willing to spend, because as you rightly say, there's no point in creating all this amazing content and then it's £10. That's £10 more than I was hoping to pay for it. So yeah, the conversation goes on, and I genuinely love having these conversations and feeling as though there's a lot more that we kind of could have explored, and other areas that we could have kind of debated. But really, I think in closing, I'd really just like to. I think bring together a couple of themes. One is the kind of classic kind of looking forward, but I think something that has always stood out for me whenever we've spoken, and something that you put into your questionnaire, pre-podcast questionnaire, was actually talking about working with writers, helping them follow their dreams and actually make money. Because I think I believe you're somebody who recognizes that we need new people, new blood coming into wine, but absolutely that question of the payment for them. It's if we're having people who are bright people, who are curious, who are well educated, then there needs to be the financial reward there as well. So I think the kind of window into that is potentially Vinosity, but equally your thoughts on that, and again, where does that fit into Academie Du Vin looking forward?
I mean, I think the economics of being a wine book publisher are not straightforward. One of my biggest wishes is to earn more money for my writers. I mean, the reality is, not just in wine book publishing, wine writing, is that the whole publishing industry, 90% of the income is earned by 10% of the authors. There are millions of authors out there earning very, very little from their books. And that's a shame. It's not great. So my mission is to build a business that particularly depends on direct to consumer, because that's where there's more margin. So I can build it so that I can sell wine books to every wine book lover out there in the world, so that every time I commission a new book, I can be confident that I can sell thousands of their books for them, and that they can make something reasonable out of the work and the expertise and the knowledge that they've put into it. Vinosity, I think, is for me, Vinosity is really, as I said, it's about being able to surface content that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and it's great, obviously, for our website and for our social media. I don't know that I'm trying to think if we've commissioned anybody for a book yet from Vinosity. I don't think so. I think for anybody who's going to be commissioned in the future, they will have to build up their writing chops, as it were. They are going to need to be commissioned by the bigger magazines, Decanter and Club O and World of Fine Wine, and maybe the Americans. And they're going to have to do a number of different things to prove that they are good wine communicators. And we're talking about the writing communicators, because obviously there are lots of fantastic communicators now, podcasters and social media people and people doing events, all of which are fabulous, valid ways of talking about wine. I think if Vinosity at least is a place where some of them can build those skills and their confidence, importantly, I think that makes me really pleased. Then again, it's one of those win-wins where it has, a sort of halo effect, where it has multiple useful things to it. We are always on the lookout for the new, the good writers. But as I said, it's that tension of they have to have begun to get a bit of a name for themselves, particularly for the Classic Wine Library. They need to be people who are known for a region that we're commissioning for. I mean, in terms of our list, we want to publish really interesting wine books that people need on their shelves, and that includes wine regions that haven't been covered well enough yet, and we know people want to know about, and that's sommeliers, but it's also just general people who particularly want to know about wines of Georgia. We have a book on that, but we're looking at Armenia and Turkey, for instance, at the moment. And on the Academie Du Vin Library list, there's a book, we haven't commissioned it yet, but it's about soil and terroir from a fantastic writer. And it could be dry as old dry books, but I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm really, really excited about that. So we sometimes decide, we know we want to do books. Obviously the anthologies are very much Susan's idea. She puts them together. And we also sometimes decide, well, we need a book on X, and we'll go out to the writer to write it. But then sometimes books come to us, of course, and in fact we get lots of approaches from people. But so it's about finding the ones that you think are really going to become stratospheric, perhaps, or within our small wine market.
Yeah. Okay. And as always, just hearing your answer there, another question. I feel like Columbo sometimes. Another thing, but. Am I right in thinking, again, this is, I think, drawing in your wider publishing and marketing knowledge. I've, again, heard, and it'd be great to get your view on this, I've heard that actually a lot of publishers now, they actually look to people's following. So it felt as though that was what you were really tapping into there when you're talking about developing their writing chops. It wasn't just about their abilities. It was also about them being known, being a name brand, having a following. And is there something there in terms of that following may have come traditionally from something like writing for Decanter, from maybe having other books published. Could it come from an Instagram following or a TikTok following even?
Yeah. Absolutely, it's a good question, and it wasn't what I was thinking about when I said writing chops. But so the reality is, if you are submitting a book, if you're a non-fiction writer, you're submitting a book for one of the big publishers. It is almost impossible at this point to get commissioned if you're working in a particular subject area if you do not have a platform, and platform means a decent number of followers. It's it takes a certain amount of the risk out of the commissioning, and I think it upsets me a bit that that's the situation, because social media is not the be all and end all, and people can be experts and have followers in other ways. But it would definitely help, I think, if I was looking at an author and I knew. I mean, it's one of the ways of ticking that, saying, yes, this person has authority because look how many people look at them on TikTok. It's not just the commercial benefit that, you then hope that they will sell it. And obviously that is a big part of the equation. But it is saying people genuinely think they know what they're talking about. I was thinking more, and I worry that this makes me sort of, the inner world of wine, and, which is obviously solipsistic and small. Do people rate this person? Do people inside the industry rate this person? And of course, when you're looking at writers, particularly if it's something for the Classic Wine Library, they have to really know their subject, but they have to be good communicators. They have to be good writers. And there are plenty of people who know a lot about wine, but who are not necessarily great communicators. So that's one of the things. Whereas if somebody's a great writer, if they know, can they do enough research to, even if they aren't the biggest experts? I don't know. I mean, it's always a bit of a balancing act. But yes, I think looking to social media is definitely one of the areas where if you are a young wine writer, if you're happy with social media, I would definitely encourage you to go and, really build your brand. It's about brand building at the end of the day. Academie Du Vin Library is the brand that I'm pushing, but I have my little personal brand just on Instagram just to give myself a place in the wine industry, especially because I'm an outsider. I've come from books, and I need to prove to people that I know what I'm talking about in the wine industry, not just as a publisher. So yeah, I think if you're a writer or a communicator, your brand is really important, and that's a big thing to work on.
A massive thanks to today's guest, Hermione Island of Academie Du Vin Library. Really happy that we're going to be working together and featuring more of your team and your writers on the channel. Make sure you visit academieduvinlibrary.com, the spelling is below, where you can browse available books, including those mentioned during this episode, as well as register for their newsletter. See you soon.